Stan Gibilisco here, showing you what I call the Lake Cabin Special random wire antenna. Lake Cabin meaning our family cottage at Lake Coudray in northwestern Wisconsin. If you wonder how that's spelled, I'm not sure what Coudray means, but it's French, and it probably means something really romantic. But it's the Lake Antenna Special. We used to go up there, our whole family, when I was a teenager, some 50 or 60 years ago. And one summer, I had the inkling to do some ham radio operating up there at that cabin. So what I did is I brought my handy-dandy, trusty-rusty transceiver, which I believe at that time was either a National 200. I don't know if any of you remember the National 200 transceiver, or the Hallicrafters FPM Frank Papa Mary 200. I believe it was, maybe it was FPM 300 transceiver. But in any case, they were not really designed for CW. They were designed for SSB, but I, of course, am a CW man and just had to make do. I took a baseball, taped a piece of wire to it, probably ripped an electrical zip cord in half and obtained a number 16 stranded copper insulated length of wire, probably about 100 feet long. And I just, with all my might, I took that baseball and I hurled it into a tree. It fell down through the tree and caught up in some of the branches and was laying on the ground. And I picked that baseball up again, and with all my 17-year-old arm's might, I threw it over a second tree. And then it hung down in the air like that. It was probably an overall length something on the order of 100 feet long. Ran it in the window of what we called the little cottage. There was a main cabin and then a little cottage that had electricity but no running water. It was just sort of a bedroom outside the main cabin, but in the summer it worked great for ham radio. It had a kitchen in it with a sink that had pipes that ran nowhere, so it didn't have as I said, it didn't have a bathroom. You had to go into the main cabin to get to the bathroom. But I wasn't worried about going to the bathroom. I was worried about seeing if I could hear any DX with this 100-foot random wire antenna. Hung between two trees up in the branches as high as I could throw them, and it was probably about 50 feet above the ground at its highest point. Had a Johnson Viking matchbox transmatch and the transceiver aforementioned. As for the ground, the only ground I had for this antenna was the electrical wiring ground, that little third prong in the outlet that in some cases doesn't even run anywhere at all. But I just trusted in it, I guess, and trusted that it really was grounded and used it as my station ground. So there were a lot of technical imperfections in this antenna, a lot of things theoretically wrong with it. But there was one thing that was practically right with it. Practically, that means in a practical sense, and that is I hooked that thing up to the radio and I got on the air and used it. And wouldn't you know, I made some of the most fabulous DX contacts that I've ever made in my life with that antenna. Conditions were ideal the way they were on my I guess it was 2013 or 2014 Wyoming vacation in going Mobile CW in Big Number 8 that I remember with such fondness. For some reason or another, That particular set of days in the summer, one summer when I was a teenager, happened to coincide with a series of days and nights in which ionospheric conditions were absolutely wonderful on the 20 and 40 meter bands. I believe the 15 meter band was used at that time. We did not have a 30 meter band way back then, nor did we have 17 meters or any of these other new bands. We had only 7, 14, and 21 megahertz, and I remember working DX late into the night on 14 and 21 megahertz, just as I did in the Wyoming vacation with the antennas I describe in that playlist. I believe it's called Winter Wanderings or something like that. Well, this was a summer wandering, and aside from swimming in the lake, which is not shown obviously, and boating in the lake during the daytime, at night I'd get on this thing and I'd turn the power level down until my sisters and my mother and my father no longer screamed at me because I was causing TVI, television interference. We had an old aerial type TV, aerial antenna, you know, those things that they used to put on the roof with a rotator, and we were listening to a station in Duluth, and I was listening to the radio. I was listening to ham radio operators in Europe and Asia and Africa, and they were listening to God only knows what stupid television program to rot their little brains, whereas I rotted my little brain with CW and that transceiver and had myself an absolute blast amongst the mosquitoes and spiders and stinging insects prevalent at lake cottages in northwestern Wisconsin every summer. Back in those years, though, we did not have those ticks that caused the dreaded Lyme disease. Have you ever heard of Lyme disease? Lyme. First discovered in Lyme, Connecticut, I guess, but in northwestern Wisconsin these days, you can hardly go up there without running the risk of getting Lyme disease. And look it up. It's a very unpleasant malady. I have had it. I nipped it in the bud with antibiotics before it could do me any damage, but a couple of my relatives let it go a little further and ended up with some pretty rotten symptoms. But fortunately, no one in my family, as far as I know, let it go as far as it can go, which might make me even more ridiculous and mentally incompetent than I am today. Oh my God! Do you think you'd even be able to understand me at all? Well, I did get a case of Lyme disease, and geez, I look like a horror on wheels. I got such blotches on my skin. You know, when you've got something like Lyme disease, you know something's wrong with you. If you don't go to the doctor, you're out of your mind. Of course, even if you are out of your mind, you probably go to the doctor. But that particular summer, predated the ticks that caused that disease, and I was out in the woods throwing baseballs with wires taped to them through trees and connecting them to ham radio transceivers and operating CW and working all kinds of DX. And it was a blast. Memories from long, long ago. An amateur radio station W1GV, Whiskey 1 Good Vibrations, which back in those days was WA0 Ocean Kilo Victor. Portable 9, because Wisconsin is in 9 land. I hailed from Minnesota. I had an electronic keyer too. I had this electronic keyer made by a company called ICO. And it was a gorgeous little keyer. All of this equipment, of course, used vacuum tubes, not transistors back in those days. And that keyer was just and I had the Vibroplex paddle and worked all that. All this old timer stuff now brings back memories as I sit in a house where I have an antenna and I can get on 20 meters and I can work pretty good DX too. And I have a nice radio, but I still recall those days with great fondness as mosquito bites raised welts all over my body, even indoors. Stan Gibilisco signing off, saying 73, which means best regards in ham radio jargon, and so long, which, in my native CW fist, shall forever after mean da-da-da-da-da-da.